Imagine you open your laptop and suddenly 100 things want attention at the same time. The keyboard says, "Hey, the user pressed a key." The browser says, "I need to load a website." Your music player says, "Don't forget the next song." And somewhere in the background, a software update appears out of nowhere and says, "I need a little bit of processing power too." Total chaos. Luckily, every computer has a processor, the tiny electronic worker whose job is to take instructions, perform calculations, and keep everything moving. But here's the interesting part. Not all processors are built for the same kind of work. Some processors are like smart managers that can handle many different tasks. Some are like giant teams of workers that can do thousands of similar jobs at once. And some are tiny specialists that spend their entire lives controlling a single device, like a washing machine, a smartwatch, or even your car. So before we compare CPUs, GPUs, and MCUs, let's remember one simple idea. A processor is just a machine that follows instructions. The real difference is how those instructions are handled, and that's where things get interesting. Meet the CPU, the Central Processing Unit, or as I like to call it, the office manager who never gets a coffee break. Imagine a company where every problem eventually lands on one person's desk. A customer needs help, a report needs approval, a meeting needs to be scheduled. A printer suddenly decides it no longer believes in printing. Somehow, the manager has to deal with all of it. That's basically what a CPU does inside your computer. The CPU is a general-purpose processor. It isn't designed for one specific job. Instead, it's designed to handle thousands of different types of tasks. Open a web browser, CPU. Play a video, CPU. Launch a game, CPU. Accidentally open 30 browser tabs and make your laptop question its life choices, definitely the CPU. Because its workload changes constantly, the CPU must be extremely flexible. It has to make decisions, switch between tasks, and figure out what should happen next. To do this, it follows a simple cycle. First, it fetches an instruction from memory. Then it decodes what that instruction means. Finally, it executes the instruction. And then it repeats the process billions of times every second. Inside the CPU are tiny high-speed storage locations called registers. Think of them as the manager's desk. Important information is kept there so it can be accessed instantly instead of searching through the company's giant filing cabinet, which is the computer's memory. Modern CPUs may only have a few cores compared to GPUs, but each core is incredibly powerful and designed to handle complex tasks efficiently. So if a computer were a company, the CPU wouldn't be the biggest workforce. It would be the smart manager making decisions, organizing work, and keeping everything running smoothly. But what happens when a task is too big for one manager and needs thousands of workers? That's where the GPU enters the picture. So far, we've met the CPU, the smart manager of our company. But what happens when the company receives a job so huge that one manager, no matter how talented, simply can't do it alone? Imagine you're asked to paint a giant wall containing millions of tiny squares. The CPU could do it, one square at a time, but it would take a very, very long time. Instead, the company hires thousands of workers. Each worker gets a small section of the wall. Nobody needs to make big decisions. Nobody needs long meetings. Everyone simply does their part at the same time. And that's the basic idea behind a GPU, the graphics processing unit. Unlike a CPU, which has a few powerful cores, a GPU contains hundreds or even thousands of smaller processing cores. Each core is not as flexible as a CPU core, but together they can perform an enormous amount of work simultaneously. This makes GPUs perfect for tasks where the same operation must be repeated over and over again. Originally, GPUs were created for graphics. Every image on your screen contains millions of pixels. Instead of one processor drawing each pixel one by one, thousands of GPU cores can work on many pixels at the same time. The result? Smooth games, detailed 3D graphics, and high-resolution videos. But engineers soon realized something interesting. Many scientific and mathematical problems also involve repeating the same calculation on huge amounts of data, and that's why GPUs became useful for much more than graphics. Today, GPUs help train artificial intelligence models, run scientific simulations, analyze massive datasets, and perform complex calculations that would take much longer on a CPU alone. Think of a GPU as a giant workforce. The CPU manages what needs to be done, then the GPU's army of workers spreads out and does the heavy lifting. So, if the CPU is the brain making decisions, the GPU is the workforce turning those decisions into results at incredible speed. But not every device needs a smart manager or a giant workforce. Sometimes all you need is one tiny worker dedicated to a single job. And that's where the MCU comes in. So far, we've met the CPU, the smart manager, and the GPU, the giant workforce. But now let's meet the processor that's quietly working behind the scenes without asking for any attention. The MCU, or microcontroller unit. Imagine a company that hires one employee whose entire job is to watch one single button. That's it. No meetings, no presentations, no performance reviews. Just one button. When the button is pressed, the employee immediately performs a specific action. And honestly, that's not very different from how many microcontrollers work. Unlike CPUs and GPUs, an MCU isn't trying to run a web browser, train an AI model, or render a 3D video game. It has one mission: control a device. A smartwatch, a microwave, a washing machine, a traffic light, or even your car. In fact, modern cars can contain dozens of microcontrollers, each responsible for a specific task. One might monitor the engine, another controls the windows, another manages the airbags. They're like tiny employees scattered throughout the company, each focused on a single responsibility. Most of the time, an MCU is just waiting, patiently, quietly, doing almost nothing. Then suddenly, a button is pressed, a sensor detects motion, the temperature changes, and the MCU springs into action. This is often called responding to an interrupt. Think of it as someone ringing a bell. The MCU hears the bell, handles the problem, and then goes right back to waiting. Because microcontrollers are designed for dedicated jobs, they're usually small, inexpensive, and extremely energy efficient. Many can run for months or even years on a battery. So while the CPU is the manager and the GPU is the massive workforce, the MCU is the dedicated specialist. It doesn't try to do everything, it just does one job really, really well.